Now look at chapter 9, verse 3. We're continuing. We're looking at snapshots of Christ. And this is our next snapshot in chapter 9, verse 3. His clothes became shining, it says in 9:3, exceedingly white, like snow, such as no launderer on earth can whiten them. The other gospel writers, in fact, Matthew 17 tells us that what happened was that Jesus, all of a sudden, light began emanating out of him. It was amazing. You talk about a dazzling show. This was not spotlights on Christ. This was the spotlight was Christ, and it was coming out. And actually what happened is, for just a moment, Jesus pulled back his humanity and let his deity, just a little of it, shine out. He let what was inside come out. Now, you know, most of us, when what's inside comes out, it doesn't glow. Right? You know, people say they lost their temper. Most of us find it, and we just let it out. You know what the Bible says? The Bible says that what's inside of us is treasure. And when we get weak, and when we get troubled, and when we get old, and when we get sick, what is supposed to happen is these bodies are supposed to start cracking and like falling apart. And the reason God does that is so that the treasure will start spilling out. Now I find that about half of the older saints, the older they get, the more worn out they get, the more sickly they get, you just find them gushing out with blessing. The other half aren't. Now, let me remind you of something. You will never be what you are not right now becoming. If you are not right now inviting God into your storms, He won't be in your storms when you're old. If you're not right now talking about Him, you're not going to talk about Him at the end of your life. If you're not right now investing for Him, you won't invest for Him later on. This idea of someday I'm going to do it is one of Satan's many lies. You are never, someday I'm going to memorize. Someday I'm going to read the Bible. Someday I'm going to witness. Someday I'm going to be a missionary. And I wouldn't give a nickel for someone that wanted to be a missionary that wasn't a missionary today. Do you think that going over to a place where, and I see Mr. Merrill, his parents told me in Belarus that it takes them, 4 hours. If they had to go get all their food out at that silly market we went to, it takes 4 or 5 hours a day just to, you go to one stand to get, a handful of potatoes, another stand to get a handful of this, and another stand to get a little cup full of this, and you buy a roll of toilet paper at another stand. That's just how life is. And do you think that will increase your missionary ability going to a place like that? Where you can't stop and get a sausage at QT and a hot cup of coffee? If you cannot, and if I cannot, read the Bible and speak for the Lord and minister for Him in the relative ease of our society, you won't do it anywhere else. It's just, all you want to do is be a world traveler, and that gets old quick. Jesus shines with glory. And what we see here is that Jesus what He's doing is, He's showing who He really is on the inside. And He shows what we're supposed to be, because it says that we partake of the divine nature. I'll show you what I mean. Look at 2 Corinthians 4 for just a second, just to show you how beautiful. I hope that's right. I didn't even have this written down. If it's not there, it's moved and we'll go on. Okay? There we go. It is 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 6. For it is the God who commanded light to shine out of darkness, who has shone in our hearts. Has anybody ever come up to you and said, I see Jesus in you. I see Him. And I want to know about Him because I see Him in you. That's the whole goal. He shines out. He has shone in our hearts. Verse 6 continues, to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. And verse 7, we have this treasure. What's that? Jesus shining out of us in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. Because when we're hard-pressed and all that, Christ just shows out of us. Is that what's happening? Not usually. But God's plan is that that's be what happens. That when you get squashed, Christ comes out. By the way, gold and frankincense and myrrh. Well, myrrh is a very interesting spice. It's gathered from the bark of these little scrubby trees that grow out in the desert. But the only way you can get it is that you have to take a machete and you have to terribly afflict the tree. You just have to chop and just utterly abuse it. And you come back in a few days and the healing sap comes out to heal all the cuts. And then you pick it off. It's kind of gummy stuff. And that's the myrrh. And myrrh is only produced through affliction. And what that teaches us is Christ is like myrrh in our lives, that the more we're afflicted, he just oozes out. And that's why the early church, the more they persecuted him, what happened? More people got saved. In our society, the more they persecute us, we pull back. I just read Dr. Louis Palau's description of being last Christmas or New Year's at the Renaissance weekend. You ever heard of that? That's where our president has 1,700 of the luminaries of the world come and spend New Year's Eve with him. And Louis Palau somehow got into it. They didn't know who he was. You know, he's the world-famous evangelist. But he went in on somebody else's path, and he was just dying to witness. And this article I read from World Magazine was his diary of how he tried to witness. And he said person after person got up and spoke, and he said he knew who they were. He said a prominent denominational leader got up to spoke, and he says, you know, you all shouldn't worry about our denomination. We're not tight on all this Bible stuff. We just want to love people. He thought, well, ditch the Bible. The next one got up, and they said, you know, we aren't exclusive. There are many religions. And he said he knew that person too. And he said he sat there and he found the Christians, because they had been so made fun of, that they were all making jokes and backpedaling, and no one stood up and spoke the truth, even though it would really cost something. And finally, I don't know how it happened, but the president just said, and how about you speak? And he stood up. He said his heart was pounding. And he got 3 minutes on this little panel, and he gave the gospel. And you know what was the saddest thing of the whole article? They gave him a table, put his name on it, and said, anybody wants to hear about that again, go to that table. And it said, out of 1,700 people, just 3 or 4 came to talk to him. He said the rest of them didn't need God. What should we do? We should be shining out even if the world is attacking us. Okay, what else does Jesus do? Look at verse 33. Now this is bad for some of you. I hope it makes you feel bad because he can still do this one. Verse 33, he came into Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he looked at them and he says, what was it you were fighting with back there on the road? Now you got to understand this. This is another picture. The roads there are paths, and they kind of go up and down the hills, and there's rocks, and there's no way you can walk real close to each other because, you know, you're kind of in sandals, and there's sticks and prickers, and so you're kind of watching where you're walking. And so, I mean, these guys are not next to each other. It's not like you're in a van with 8 of you where you can hear each other. So obviously, these guys were at the back of the line complaining and fighting over who was going to be greatest. Here's Jesus way up there. No way he could physically have heard them. And what he's doing is he's reading, he's knowing and hearing their thoughts. He knows what's going on. And he says, what was it you were disputing among yourselves on the road? But they kept silent, for on the road they had disputed among themselves about who would be the greatest. Here's another thing Jesus could do. He could hear their words when he wasn't in their presence, and he could read their thoughts that only they knew about, they thought, but he knew about them too. And you know, that's a very unnerving thing for us unless we keep our mind pure and our thoughts pure and our words just acceptable in his presence. And this is something Jesus does. He can read our minds, and he read their minds. And who can forgive and heal and master the weather and calm storms and shine with glory and read minds? Only God. And that's what he's proving himself to be.